I didn't want, in the middle of this very urgent coronavirus crisis, not to go back and look at other things that are equally as important, like the recovery of people in your community and beyond. How's it all going?
Well, Peter, thank you. I mean, it's great to be able to share what's happening with the country. And look, it's very tough. We've still got people who are living in tents on their blocks, people in campgrounds, in caravans. We are doing our level best to make sure that we get pods onto people's places and in some cases retrofitting new sheds so that people can survive the upcoming winter where, you know, quite often we can get -4 mornings in our part of the world. So, look, it's, as you said, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it's still very raw for so many.
So while we're all whinging about being locked up at home, we at least can close the door and put the heater on. And I lived in Canberra for many years. I know it gets into sub-zero temperatures pretty much in your neck of the woods from Anzac Day and beyond. Are people really in that sort of circumstance still? Are they really living in tents and they're in make-do housing? How is it that the services and the money and all that charitable support, how has that not flowed?
Well, some of it has, but when you lose 950 homes in a local community like we've seen, and we don't have the social housing capacity, there are many people who do need to be on their block or have had to go to the local campground or caravan park, and that's the key challenge. One of the worst things about COVID is you can't get in your car anymore and go and see people and try and fix things up, and that's where it's been a challenge for all of the disaster welfare people. We had organisations like Blaze Aid who were going onto farms to help farmers repair fencing. They had to pack up their camps and go. It's been a tragedy on a tragedy. And, you know, one of the things I think we do know from the fire crisis, whilst we were united in fighting the fires and survival, we had become very united in recovery. And one of the things that breaks my heart the most is that people's well-being, their mental health can be supported when communities come together. We've lost our sense of community because everyone's had to isolate from each other. And there's nothing more important than being with the people that you saw through this tragedy and knowing they're okay at this time. And it is very tough going to be able to do that. And, you know, I know that people still reflect on the fires around the country, but, you know, we are obviously doing our level best to basically fill holes in a very leaking bucket at the moment.
And you've been hit with this double whammy of COVID too, because I know usually over Easter a lot of those communities would have had visitors and a lot more wanting to be down there. I know I'd planned a trip with some girlfriends down to East Gippsland about this time because we wanted to be part of this recovery effort, come and spend our money and do all the things we should. How do you get through this? I mean, the Red Cross money, there was literally millions, over 100 million raised. Has that started to hit the ground? What about the money from Celeste Barber? What happened with that, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's got to be some very serious transparency and accountability around those charitable funds in the same way there needs to be transparency around state and federal and local government funds and the way they're deployed to assist Australians who've had to stare this down. It's only right. It's a just thing to do. And one of the things which I do support, you know, particularly when I've heard Alan Jones talk about this, we do need a national disaster relief fund so that we have the agility when a crisis happens, that we don't see the scattergun approach where...
You are absolutely right.
Yeah, and we can build in that transparency and that openness as to how the dollars are spent. The Red Cross had to change its requirements about 3 or 4 times within a 2-month period after all that incredible generosity of Australians. Now, that, I think, is a reflection of a system that is broken. That's the point. And, you know, we need strong community and business leadership more so now, and political leadership more so now than in our nation's history. And you've got to be able to achieve that by having that openness and transparency and people prepared to say, look, we haven't spent all those funds just yet, but we can make sure, given we are dealing with such a significant crisis, that we can deploy those funds even better.
Look, you hit the nail on the head Andrew, it's an absolute no-brainer, absolute no-brainer that there isn't a national fund. The envelope of money could sit there with the Future Fund. It delivers returns better than any bank, any other organisation, and no one can doubt the bona fides of Peter Costello. You get two former Prime Ministers. I know one used to be a firefighter. I can find a Labor one. I wouldn't get the other Liberal, but you could get them all involved. You could be there and administer this money and take the politics out of it, and also the bureaucracy, because there's one thing to have a catastrophe. There's another thing to get the money moving and let people recover. I think it's been bloody hard. I want to ask you about the Royal Commission, because it's underway, and one of the big issues was hazard reduction. Now, I talked about this at the top of the show. Our bushfires have delivered in the last year double the emissions of energy, transport and industry combined. But we don't count bushfire emissions, we count the emissions from hazard reduction, which is, I think, one of the reasons why not enough hazard reduction burns are done. You've got to be drowning in green tape and red tape and all of that stuff. How can we fix this?
Well, I think this is the key point. I mean, I am horrified that we are 3 to 4 months off, and we're going to be potentially, if we get a dry spell over winter, we could see people burnt out again like we were burnt out on New Year's Eve. It is horrifying to think that, you know, we again see another Royal Commission, another more inquiries, just building on the same recommendations that have been poured out before. I think the Gary Nan inquiry after the Canberra bushfires and the fires in the Snowy Mountains, again, there's a lot of recommendations in that. So, look, I'm not a huge fan of doing more inquiries when we know the actual solutions. The reality is that decades of neglect in land management of our parks estate, our forestry estate, our Crown Lands estate, our council reserves has added to this. I mean, we have 4 land managers in New South Wales. 2 of them don't have any firefighting capability. The other 2 in forestry and national parks don't have the primary objective to save communities and save lives. And, you know, I come from a grazing family in the Monero. My grandfather had a grazing lease in the Perisher Valley in the 1940s and 50s. And the big argument when they were booted out of the mountains was, well, who was going to do the fire management and burn off so that they could reduce the hazard? Now, they learnt that from Aboriginal people. That's bottom line. The early settlers didn't learn to burn the bush amongst themselves. They learnt that from the Aboriginal people. And we went 70 years where we neglected that. And then we had terrible drought. And then we got burnt out. And people lost their lives. You know, Richard and Patrick Solway did not deserve to die on that day because we had not burnt the bush in advance of that. Now, I am horrified that we potentially are going to go back and make the same mistake. We will see the same terrible images that people saw on their televisions from New Year's Eve.
As we saw in Victoria, Andrew, as we saw in Victoria in 2009 when the Royal Commission report came down, all 5 volumes, most of the recommendations adopted, and none of them bloody implemented. None of them implemented. Adopted, yes. Implemented, no. Can I come back to you every month or so while this Royal Commission's underway? I want to stay right across this issue. I want to keep up the pressure. I'd love to have you on again, and we'll keep on it.